whenever I'm getting ready to do some type of article, I always go and research it. And it's so funny. And you have to bear with me if you're listening on the call and you're like, well, I wouldn't know that. Well, you're not expected to. But for those of us that are in the industry, you can go read an article. You're like, oh, they've never been in the real world, right? Because it's kind of like textbook. This is how a financial plan happens. This is how an estate plan happens. This is what you do. And it's like, wait a minute. There's like the textbook and then there's the real world. And hopefully today, what we're going to be able to do is merge the two. Hi, I'm Annette Ba'u, host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast and founder of the Millionaire Insider. My mission is to help you simplify the money game so you can create a financially secure and fulfilled life without having to have a PhD or spend countless hours on your finances. You're going to learn how to think like a millionaire, stop worrying about money and wondering if your financial house is truly in order, and instead spend your time doing what you love. With over 3 decades advising 7, 8, and even 9-figure millionaires, and now joining that elite group, I'm in a unique position to help you make the best financial choices so you can create a secure financial future and retirement you love. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. Most people understand the importance of a medical checkup, right? Most of us get them annually. And yet, how many people don't do a financial checkup? So I really encourage you to take our financial health checkup. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/FC. This financial health checkup is similar to a medical checkup where you go and assess where you are. Because the first step to getting from where you are to where you want to be is to assess where you are now and what's the next best step to take. So again, themillionaireinsider.com/FC. Our free resource today is our estate planning checklist. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. This checklist provides you insight on things you need to do to get your estate plan in order. And I strongly encourage you with what we're talking about today, the nightmares of not having an estate plan in order. This is a must-have checklist. Again, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. So welcome to real-time estate planning, when done right and when done wrong. This episode can literally save you and your heirs hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/67. All materials, forms, and intellectual property are copywritten by themillionaireseries.com. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide any investment, financial, tax, retirement, planning, or healthcare advice. By listening, you agree to hold millionaireseries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved. So I'm so excited. We have Susan Swinehart here, who is one of our financial transition certified advisors and is also an attorney. So welcome, Susan.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Susan is both an attorney and a financial advisor, and she lives in Troy, Ohio. She specializes working with women and people going through a life transition. And as I mentioned, she's an attorney, so she's got a big realm of expertise. She focuses in a lot on retirement planning, tax planning, as well as women and couples going through a life transition, divorce, death, inheritance, all those things. So I'm so excited to have you on the call. This is not the first time Susan's been here. And if you saw her last time, you know what a wealth of information she is. So again, welcome, Susan.
Thanks.
So let's just talk, first of all, before we start diving into all the details, let's just talk about what is an estate plan, just from your perspective as an attorney.
An estate plan is a plan that a person puts together so that it's even when they are alive, things that they need to do, as well as when they pass. And so the plan is actually their plan on where they want their assets to go, who to get the assets, what they're doing with the assets. And then, of course, often people think if I do a will or a trust, I'm done. It's not one and done. We all know our lives are fluid. And so a lot of times these things need to be updated and changed according to what's going on in the people's lives.
So I love that you said that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about, because I always love when somebody comes and says to me, I just did my estate plan. I'm like, oh, that's great. So they say they just did their estate plan, and then they act like they're done. So let's talk about for 1 minute, because there are a lot of assets that don't pass via a trust or a will. So can you elaborate a little bit on that and give our listeners some insight?
What doesn't go through a will or a trust is retirement plans, IRAs, 401ks, because you have a beneficiary and you have a beneficiary, and you should always, always have a contingent beneficiary in case the beneficiary passes away. Because so many times people have their primary beneficiary pass away and they didn't have a contingent. So then it ends up going through probate because they didn't do that. And actually, if I can elaborate on that a little bit, a few years ago, I had a gentleman who passed. He had life insurance policy. He left it to his wife. She had predeceased him, and they didn't tell me. He didn't tell me he had the insurance policy, and he had no contingent. And everything in his will was to go to his granddaughter. But the way the insurance company read the policy and how they interpreted everything, it went to his mother, and his granddaughter got $0 of that policy because he didn't have her on there as contingent. So those kinds of life insurance policies do not go through probate or a will normally, or retirement plans. Or you can have transfer on death accounts. They wouldn't go through a will or of trust. So those are some of the things that don't go through a will or a trust.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so had his wife died and then he named a new primary beneficiary that was his granddaughter, that would have been okay. Or he could have named his wife as a primary and then the granddaughter as a contingent. And if he didn't change it and she was already deceased, then it would pass through the granddaughter.
Right.
And
exactly.
I think getting into what she's talking about as far as payable on death, we've got assets that pass via title, like real estate, stocks, bonds. And so if those are not coordinated, meaning titled in your trust, then you got a problem. Now, sometimes what happens is they're not titled that way, and then you have a pour over will, but then that's going to trigger a probate. And then the only other thing I want to add to what she said as far as beneficiary designations, in addition to qualified accounts, is life insurance or an annuity. And I really want to talk 1 minute about life insurance because I saw this early in my career. So there was thank goodness it wasn't my client, but there was another advisor who had a client who had the ownership as him and his wife, but the beneficiary was his ex. And it was so interesting because once he got divorced from his ex-wife, he's like, oh yeah, I've got to get my new wife on. And it was like, he just didn't understand. So he thought by putting the title as him and his wife, joint tenants with right of survivorship, that at his death, she would get it. But at his death, what ended up happening is it passes via beneficiary. So she got nothing and the ex-wife got it all. Now, some states like Arizona now has changed where if you're divorced, it automatically removes a spouse. But it's my understanding some states are like that, some aren't. So Susan, you probably know more than about that in other states. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, it just depends. Yeah, I think it's being pretty common that they're divorced. It does mean the current wife. But yeah, that's right. They're getting more modern in that situation.
Well, and they need to. Now, let's talk for 1 minute. I mean, we've talked about some things on why an estate plan is important, but do you have anything else to add on a bigger scope of why it's so critical to have an estate plan?
You need a plan, and 60% of the people have nothing. So then a person ends up dying, and then an administrator has to be appointed. And so that could cause a whole nother issue of all different kinds of things happening. If there's an administrator has to be appointed, a lot of times the person has to go to court to get appointed. And in some states, the person who's administrator must be a resident of that state. So oftentimes people want their kids to be in charge. And if the kids live out of state and there's no will, they can't be administrator. So there are myriad of things that
is that happen. Is that in all states or just some states?
I think it's in some. I mean, I know it's in some, but I'm not sure about all states. Yeah. But that's the problem. And here's another thing that I think people miss when administrators appointed. When administrators appointed, they have to have bond. And the bond is according to how big the estate is. So if somebody absconds with the money or does something wrong, and if you have a will, usually attorneys put in wills that no bond is required. So you don't need to have that expense. Whereas the bond, you pay whatever the bond is, then that money's gone. That doesn't get distributed to any heirs of any sort. There are so many things that are nightmarish about having administrators. And at least in our state, if you have no will and you have an administrator, the surviving spouse gets the first 60,000 of the estate and then has to share. Then after that, only gets 1/3 of whatever is left because the kids get all the rest. And if the kids are not her natural kids, she only gets 20,000 and 1/3 of everything.
Oh,
And,
wow.
people think, oh, my wife's going to get everything or my husband. Wrong. That is wrong. It's not going to happen. And then the really big thing is so many people, hate to say it, this day and age, have kids they don't really trust or like. Well, they don't want their kids to get much of anything, but then they're going to end up getting almost as much as the spouse. So
Yeah.
that's a big downfall.
Well, and one of those cases I spoke with at one of my workshops, and I've seen this happen several times, but it was really interesting because her dad had married a younger woman, and the woman was actually only like 5 years older than her. So the dad, I just don't think he was really thinking because he wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. So he left the money to his wife with the game plan that at her death, the kids would get it. Well, she's 5 years older. So now the kids are in their 60s, maybe now even in their 70s, and they're like starving to death. And the ex-wife has this like $50 million property. It was just one of those things where no one thought it through. And maybe you have some comments to add, because I see so many times when people have spent tens of thousands of dollars to do their estate plan. And I'm like, what? It's like, from a conceptual standpoint, it's a great document. But from a practical one, I'm like, are you thinking about this or the fact that your son's going to get the business, but your daughter's not going to get it and he's going to have to pay, which is going to strap him on the business? Why not get some life insurance or get something that makes it easier so you don't have the burden on your son? And so do you have comments on that? Like, where it's just not practical?
Well, a lot of times what happens when people think about their estate plan, they only go to that first layer. Then you guys say, well, if such and such happens, what do we do then or what should be done? And so it just goes on down and you got to think of all the contingencies. But so many times people don't think any further than this is what I want to happen. They don't think, well, if X happens, then I need to take care of Y. And that happens so frequently, they just don't just go down the thing. Here's the thing. I did a will for a guy and one son is kind of worthless. Another one's been very successful, but not in the state. And he didn't want to bother him. He had this young gentleman he put him on as executor. And I said, well, we need an alternate. He said, no, just going to put him on there as executor. And then the gentleman died like 3 months ago. And even though the executor was I think he's probably in his 30s, early 40s, he moved to another state and they just had a baby. And he said, I don't want to be executor. We tried to get him convinced and said, we help you with the paperwork. You just have to basically sign paperwork and do X, Y, Z. And he said, I don't want to. So we had no alternate. So now we had to appoint an administrator. And then it ended up being the son who's been very successful. And then he ends up being in Spain part of the time because he's retired. So then he has to come back here. And
help me understand in that case, like what were the reasons why you didn't have a trust?
Because everything was transferred on death. Otherwise, some of the stuff was transferred on death. Well, about everything was. But since I did the will, he also bought a different house, which he never got back to me that he bought another house for me to do anything with. I didn't have a trust because he was done with the one son. I mean, meaning I've given him all the money he's ever needed. You know what I mean? He doesn't deserve any more. Yeah. And he said the one son's been very successful. It's been the great son. And then the other son would never listen to me. And I've taken care of him his whole life. And so that's why he didn't care.
What is your typical threshold when you recommend somebody get a trust?
It all depends. These are the reasons I do a trust. Is second marriages, You have kids who are worthless, or, you don't want to get the money as soon as you die.
We'll rephrase that. We're not saying anyone's worthless. Let's just say less than optimal performance.
Yeah. And that's a reason. And then if you have real estate in another state, because otherwise, if you put the real estate into the trust, you don't have to open up a probate estate in the state where your real estate is. And sometimes a real estate is good enough reason to have a trust.
Well,
so
and
these
to
are all the
comment on
different
that,
things.
you end up going through two probates, your state and that state. So now you've got a double whammy. I personally, I deal with mostly affluent clients. So, I really do. I just can't even remember any client ever not doing a trust. That said, I understand that maybe there are situations where you don't need one. It's just, there are so many benefits from a standpoint of if you become incapacitated, making sure that the person that's managing your assets has a fiduciary duty, making sure that you've got some contingencies in there of who's managing it and that they're managing it for your best interest. And so I personally love trust, but I'm sure that there's differing opinions as far as sometimes, it probably doesn't warrant it, especially if a person doesn't have significant assets, right?
Right, right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Let's get a little bit more before we talk about some real world cases. But can you just explain what intestacy is so people know?
Now, that means that someone has passed and they have no will or trust. And so then all the assets are out there for an administrator to take care of and administrator to be appointed. And a lot of times, administrators may be a family member, but sometimes they're attorneys if nobody comes forward or nobody wants to deal with the estate. So that's what that means. No will, no or trust.
And so when somebody, say for instance, doesn't have a will or a trust and you end up then going to court, how long does that typically take?
Oh, well, it all depends on the court's time frame. You can apply to get somebody appointed. Now, sometimes you can just do the paperwork and get them appointed, but other times you have to go, you're like if two people want to be administrator, you have to go to court to see who the court wants to appoint. And each person has to say why they should be administrator. Typically before anybody even gets appointed, even if it's just doing the paperwork and the court reviewing the paperwork, it can take 3 or 4 months before anybody even gets appointed. So it
And
just
then
goes
if
on.
you
This
have
goes
two
on.
people, I assume then there could be some conflict, right? I want to
Yeah,
do it.
right.
Oh, yeah. And then
Yeah.
probably the same. Now, conservators who would take care of your kids and or grandkids. Now you might think, okay, well, my kids are grown, but what about those grandkids? Early in my career, I had so many situations early in my career that were like life changing, but one was they didn't name a conservator for their kids. And I will never forget it because both grandparents wanted the children and they didn't get along. And I just remember that the judge actually put them in temporary foster care, not even with a family member. And he
Wow.
said, if your kids were so concerned about you getting the kids, they should have stated that. And I was like, oh my God, I just remember reading that, thinking how traumatic for these poor children. They lose both of their parents. There's a ton of fighting. It was just a disaster from the get-go. But what was really concerning is the fact that they were just so vicious in fighting that I think the judge was concerned that wherever the kids were, they weren't safe. And so maybe you can talk for 1 minute about how important it is, even if you don't have kids, maybe you have grandkids, and the importance of making sure that they're being cared for and that someone that is capable is going to care for them. So they're not in foster care. How terrifying is that? So do you have comments on that?
Yes, I do. I always suggest that people, when they have their kids, that the people they have choose as guardians are people that are just like them. The religion, the education, the social, wherever they are socially. And it's the same environment. All you're doing is picking up this kid out of this one household, moving it over here, and it's going to be just like they were when they were at home. And that is what is important. So many people think they need to have their parents as guardians, and that is not true. The grandparents may raise them right and so forth, but whoever were the people's close friends of the decedents are the really ones who where the kids will thrive better. And that's
Well, and
what's
I
always
think one of
important.
the things, like I know when our kids were little, our thought process was that our guardians could live in our house. We wouldn't sell any of our homes. They could live there, go, just like nothing changed. And I think there's a lot of things you can do to really make it seamless. And it's, if you do have a lot of money, sometimes that's hard to have your kids going to somebody else who has the same amount of money. But if you've got money and you've got a nice house or nice houses, and they're still living there and the other people are moving in, and then, you've got enough money to support that lifestyle, I think that can also work. And if you
Yeah.
don't, but you want that, if you don't have the money and you want that, then you can just do it through life insurance, right?
Right. Right.
So let's
Yeah.
talk about, I want to talk about we have some time for some real world cases. And I'd love to hear some. You can share some of your horror stories and I'll share some of mine. So tell me some of the ones that have just been recently. I know we were on a call and she was going on and on about just crazy stuff. And I thought, it's so funny because the world we live in as advisors is so different than the average person. Because I was thinking, like, why are people not taking care of this? It's because most people have no idea the impact of not having an estate plan. Like, if they could see what we see pretty much on a daily basis, or if not a daily, then maybe a quarterly basis, they'd be like, oh my gosh, my top priority is getting my estate plan in order. So share with me some
Yeah.
stories
Well,
you've
that's
had.
exactly right. Because, I always go to the one where the son of the decedent lives in another state and he hadn't been to see his father in like 10 years. And we couldn't even find him until a relative of the dad came forward and said, I think he has a son in another state, because we had to publish. This is another thing. You have to
Oh,
publish to
yeah.
try to find the next of kin. And we have published that. And so that's how we happened to find out the decedent had a son. And that's been a nightmare because he thought his dad lived in a different house and he didn't, because he hadn't been back here to see where his dad actually lived. So he was trying to say the house was worth so much more than what the value was appraised. Well, he had a whole different house. He thought it was the rental where his dad had been living instead of the house he actually owned. And then it was just really hard to deal with him. And then he couldn't open up the bank account to cash the check the money he was to inherit. And it was just a nightmare. And then another thing we had kind of recently, a woman lived in our state. She moved to another state and was only there a week and died. So then we got into the situation because all of her assets were here except the house she bought in the other state. So then we had to ask the court, okay, which state is supposed to take, and she didn't have a will. And so which state is supposed to deal with the estate, this state or the other state? So the court came up with the idea saying that, well, since most of her assets are here and she'd only been in the other state a week, even though she owned a house there, it's the state where her assets are. See, that could fall in either way, but it was really like the state she moved to really didn't want the case. And so, we went back and forth.
Interesting.
Who's taking it? Because it's supposed to be the state where the person's a resident.
Right.
But they said she wasn't there long enough, is what the other state said.
Oh,
Our
was it
county
less than
said,
6? Was it less than 6 months?
yeah, she'd only been there a week and
Okay.
died.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
it
normal.
stayed here.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Well,
it stayed here.
let me tell you one. This one was absolutely crazy. So, woman was in one of my workshops and she said, I really need an advisor. Okay, let's meet. So we sat down and I had reviewed their document. I said, well, who is Joe? Joe Doe. And she said, oh my gosh, Joe Doe. He was like one of our best friends, such a great guy. And we were like best friends with him and his wife for 30 years. But poor guy was an alcoholic and in and out of rehab. And he just could not knock his habit. And, we just fell apart and, I have no idea. And I'm like, well, how do you feel about the fact that if something happens to your husband, he'll be making the financial decisions? And she was like, oh my God. They just had never updated their estate plan and they totally forgot they named him. And so thank goodness we were able to find that and correct it. But that's an example of where, oh my gosh, the cost of having to go to court and get somebody removed and find somebody else. And it's crazy. Now, I was just recently at a conference and I had a conversation with a gentleman who handles most of his and his wife's affairs. And he started talking about things. it appeared from what he was saying is that if something happens to him, they're going to name a corporate trustee. Now, I don't know the couple super well. I've only met them on a couple of occasions, but I would be pretty comfortable that the wife has no idea. Like she has no clue that something happens to her husband. She's thinking, oh, great, somebody's going to be there managing the assets. She doesn't realize that she's going to have to get approval to get those assets from that corporate trustee. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a perfect example where you got to make sure that you're thinking about what it's like real world, and she's like, oh, she doesn't really want to worry about it. And my big thing is you can delegate until you're blue in the face, just don't abdicate. The people that get in trouble, in my opinion, are people who abdicate, which brings me to cases where the biggest one, she had like 85 million. We don't even know exactly how much she had because I interviewed the financial advisor, but it was somewhere in the 80 plus million, ton of money. And she didn't find out that her and her husband's CPA of 20 years was stealing money from her until she got the call from her alma mater saying your $2 million check just bounced. And she said it was really interesting because, and again, this is from the advisor, but that, his lifestyle kept going up. He's driving this like $200,000 car. He's taking all these trips and she just was not paying attention. She had delegated, which is okay, but she then abdicated. And what's interesting is I have seen this so many times where you've got a trustworthy advisor when both parties are there. And typically it's the husband, at least it's been in the past, where he's paying attention. But the minute he dies, now all of a sudden he's not paying attention. The women or the wife doesn't know. And she's thinking, oh, he took good care of us. He'll do fine. You can delegate. You cannot abdicate. And when you abdicate, you are just asking for problems. It is such a disaster. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, that's absolutely true. I always tell women, if you're not in the day-to-day mix of the investments and knowing what's going on, at least know where it is, what it is, and why you have it. And so many women, that's happened twice within the last week. They don't know. They've come in, it's like, well, I have to work. I take care of the kids. I take care of the house. That's his thing. I said, I don't care. If
you
it's
don't
his
care
thing.
until you don't have any money. And then you care a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The issue of money is this. You either deal with your money now and manage it, or it's going to manage you for the rest of your life. And the reality of it is when you don't have enough money in retirement, which they say is going to be like, what? I mean, the numbers are staggering. They just did a recent study that found that like people think they need like 1.4 million, which I would kind of debate that it might need to be a little higher than that. But let's just say it is 1.4 million. And most people have saved like 200,000. I mean, there's such a discrepancy. And then another advisor was talking about the fact that one of their kids wants to retire. And she said, the problem is they haven't saved a lot of money. They have like $100,000. I'm like, they're not even in touch with reality. You have $100,000 and you think you're going to retire? I'm like, on what? Social Security, which the average check is like what, $1,600 a month. It's like a difference between reality and what's going on in their life. And it's just something that I don't know about you, but I see it, I hear about it more than I see it, but it's problematic.
Yeah, that is for sure. People have no concept on how much it really is. And I was telling someone just yesterday, I said, I can't imagine a person who retired 20 years ago, whatever they had to live on. And now inflation doubles every 20 years. So all the inflation that doubled plus what additionally
plus last year, right? Like in the last 2 years, it's like,
and I just can't imagine that.
Well, I know. And I think one of the things is I just think so many people go into retirement. I'm always like, you got to do a test run. You've got to see, first of all, number one, how much are you truly spending? And number two, does this work for you? I mean, obviously I could retire. You could retire too. We aren't. But I think part of it is there's some benefit of continuing to do something versus just sitting on your tail doing nothing. That's number one. But number two, it's also the fact of how much do you need? Now, I'm admittedly too much the other way. Okay, if I am going to have problems in retirement, like forget because of what my wealth is. That said, I'm still concerned about it. And I think it's just because I know the reality that what you think is going to happen a lot of times doesn't happen. And you got to be protected and you got to be aware. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So many people aren't aware of how much it really takes to live and that inflation factor and keep your money growing, where they think, oh, just put it here in the bank. You can't do that. Inflation and taxes eats up everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to be ahead of that game.
Well, and you got to have guaranteed income. Like I am so pro guaranteed income because at least if you've got enough guaranteed income, you've got one less worry. And, it used to be guaranteed income used to be from Social Security and an employer. Now, guaranteed income is really you taking and repositioning your assets. And that's where I think a lot of people, they don't realize their biggest risk, especially women, is longevity risk.
And that's huge with all the new things and the longevity. So that's where a lot of people fall short. Everybody thinks, just because my dad died at 65, I'm going to die. And they said, no, that's not true. Because most of it's your lifestyle.
Oh, and even technology, things that you died from 20 or, 15, 20, 30 years ago have dramatically changed. All right, I have one other story I wanted to share, and then maybe you have one, and then we can conclude. But another one was, and I've seen this a couple of times, where somebody leaves real estate or a business to two siblings that don't get along. It just doesn't work. And in fact, they fought for probably a decade until they finally got a court order as far as having to sell it. But it was just bad. It was bad blood from the beginning, and it just got worse. And I think a lot of times people think, like, I remember once the same thing happened with a company. One person did not want to run it. The other one was running it. It was not fair. It caused even more strain in their relationship. So I think you've got to be really aware of that. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, that's so common. That's a question I always raise to the clients because they think the kids are going to get along or they want to be equal in those things. And I said, no, it's better you do one thing for one thing for the other, and let it be done. Mm-hmm. And you just figure it out so that financially they come out pretty evenly as much as they can, because that's a huge thing. And I always say, everybody, this is like time after time after time. Everybody looks like receiving money from an estate as their last time to get the lottery. And everybody who comes in has a story about where that was the case. And I tell everybody that. And once in a while, you'll find a family where it's all easygoing, where it turns out right, or they do get along. But usually just somebody yesterday was telling me about what happened with her and her brother. And, they're going, why? And I said, it's a lottery. Everybody gets greedy when somebody dies.
Oh, period. Recently, talking about that, literally, I've had two women in the last 2 weeks. One completed a survey, and she said her and her boyfriends, they were never married. Things were great. They were together for like 20 years. She homeschooled the children. So I'm assuming they were her kids, because if you understand how intestacy worked, if it was his kids, they would have gotten the assets. But make a long story short, they had a paid-for Mediterranean home that they built together. It was just, everything was great, except for the fact that her name was not on the title and he didn't have a will. And when he died, basically the house ended up going to his relatives who lived over in Asia. And she said it's been devastating. She said she can barely even make ends meet. She lives in California, so you can imagine the cost of living, just devastating. But then I was just at a workshop and this woman goes, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about retirement. And I said, can I ask you a couple of questions? She said, yeah. And I said, well, tell me about your situation. Well, the first thing that came out is the fact that, do you own your house? No, my boyfriend of 12 years does. So she's paid half the mortgage from day one, but his name is on the title. And I go, wait a minute, is it payable on death? No. Why not? We've just not gotten around to it. I go, that might be something you want to get around to. And then she says, well, his family really likes me. I go, yeah, they like you now. Wait until they start getting money. It changes, you guys. No matter how much your in-laws or your kids or your stepkids love you, when they get money, everything changes. And it's not that they won't still love you, but they're going to love you with the money. They don't not love you without the money, meaning you get the money. Yeah. And she goes, oh, I never really thought about that. And so those are things that having somebody look at the bigger picture is so critical. I cannot stress that. So do you have anything to add to that, Susan?
Well, that is just so true. Need to look at it like everybody's after the money, you know what I mean? And provide for everybody who you want to be provided. These people who say, oh, everybody gets along fine, it'll be okay. And I look at them and go, no, it's not. Don't count on it. It's rarity. And that's like yesterday, the people came in, wanted a will. And the same thing, the woman's name was on the deed because she had gotten a divorce a number of years ago. And so that was part of the deal. She got the house and the deed. His name was not on the deed. And he's been paying half the mortgage. And he has 4 kids. She has 2. So the situation, I said, wait, what she wanted is for him to be in the house as long as he lived if she passed first. And then what they have must be like a double duplex. And half of the house, she wanted the house sold, his kids get one half of the money, and her 2 kids get the other half. But I convinced him to put his name on the deed so it would go, whoever dies first does get it. You don't have to rely on the will saying he gets it for the rest of his life so that he can have it. So we're doing that. Then the half, when the death of the last one, that we'll say half of it goes to each set of kids.
Yeah. And then
this stuff get complicated.
But then you want provisions in there that if they don't get along, what are the terms of selling it? And I mean, there's just a lot of things to make sure. And one of the things you can always do, if you have a larger estate, what we have in addition to how we have it set up as far as our trustees is we have a trust protector. Now, my trust protector happens to be my securities attorney. Because I figured out of anyone in the world, like he would know, right? But he's not doing that for other clients. And he was even a little reluctant in doing it for me until I had to talk him into it. But I just wanted someone there who, if the trustees aren't following the instructions or there's a problem, someone who knows would step in. And so a trust protector, I think, I'd love to hear your comments and then we can conclude. Explain what a trust protector is.
Well, it's just somebody who oversees the trustees to make sure they're doing the right thing. And then if somebody has a complaint or thinks the trustees aren't doing the right thing, they can see that the right thing is done and give their opinion about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Keeps kids from spending money that they're really not entitled to, like rating the trust, take all the assets out and they spend them when they're supposed to be getting an income stream for life. The trust protects, if he's paying attention, she's paying attention, would know that. Oh, this has been so good. So let's recap really quickly. 1, you got to create an estate plan, avoid probate, avoid intestacy, avoid all the hassles of somebody getting your money. You don't want to get your money, making sure your family's taken care of. You got to remember to fund your trust, and funding your trust means you've got to change the title when appropriate or the beneficiary, primary and contingent. And really, you need to be working with a qualified advisor, either a qualified attorney or a financial advisor or a combination thereof to make sure this gets done. We were just on our last call for our financial transition certified advisors, and we were talking about the fact of how many attorneys don't fund trusts, and then they get to do the probate. They make a lot more money on the probate. And I don't want to say it's intentional, even though I know some law firms say this is our annuity income stream because we have so many of them. So if you've done a trust, you got to make sure you fund it. And it is a lot of time and money to do that. So if you work with a good advisor, they can help you so that you can go do some of it on your own. You don't have to just pay them. But boy, that is something that is priceless. Is there anything else you want to share in conclusion?
I want to reiterate how important the funding the trust is because I see it time and time again. I've had people come in and say, well, the attorney did a trust, but there's nothing in it. And then he made us go through probate. Is that right? And I said, he probably wanted the money because there's a lot more money going through probate than there is a trust. And that is so true. That is so true. Everybody needs to get those trusts funded, but you hardly ever see them funded. And it's only because the document's there, but the asset isn't in the trust. You must make sure that.
And just to say, when we say trust funded, that means that you change the assets that pass via title. So the title, instead of it being you or joint tenants with right of survivorship with your partner or someone else, is in the trust, properly titled. Or the beneficiary, if it passes via beneficiary, like say life insurance, it doesn't matter what you do on your title of life insurance. I mean, it does impact different things, but it does not impact where it's going to pass. So you've got to get the beneficiary. And I'll tell you one other story just to make the point of this. So in this particular situation, this person got his mom to change all the beneficiary designations on her life insurance to him. When she died, he got all this money and the siblings were livid, and understandably so. She did not know what she was doing. Her intent was the fact that she wanted all those kids to get the money. She thought that it was going to pass to each one. She had no idea. So you just got to be working with competent, qualified advisors that really make sure that your intents are coming to fruition. And All
For
right.
sure.
Well, great. Well, thank
Okay.
you so much,
Thank you.
Susan. We'll continue this
Okay.
conversation. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. If you love the content of this podcast, please follow and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of episodes, and also give us a 5-star review and share a comment. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on taking another step to create a financially free life you love. If you're not sure about your financial future or that it's in order, or you are ready to stop worrying about money, or possibly the fear of becoming a bag lady, ending up broke in retirement, or you simply are ready to know your financial house is in order so that you can have a bright financial future, please go to themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. And that doesn't stand for non-sufficient funds. It stands for Next Step Finance. It's the next best step of what you need to do so you can avoid an NSF notice in your future. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. The number of women who were not broke or poor while working or married is staggering. The entire mission of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast is to ensure you have the information for you, your family, your friends, anyone who's willing to listen to it and apply it so that you can create a financially free life you love. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. Until our next episode, take one action that will help you create a financially free life you love. I'm Annette Ba'u, your host. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now.